So for some of you that don't know, the Women's Center of Halton supports women in trauma, crisis, and transition. And this is where the You're Worth It series comes into play. Welcome to our first episode focused on self-care. I am so pleased to see the turnout today to hear Sim, Kelly, and Kim. We have three very talented, smart, and kick-butt women who are speaking today. I'm beyond thrilled that they are joining us and now part of the Women's Center team. Without further ado, I'm going to jump in and introduce our first speaker, Sim. Give a little wave, Sim. Sim is highly educated and qualified. I can't even give all the acronyms after her name. It's unbelievable. And she is going to be speaking on healthy relationships. For the past 10 years, she has worked as a behavior consultant, became a psychotherapist in 2015, and is also a professor. Sim will be talking about practicing self-care through building healthy relationships and setting boundaries. And I know this is all something that we can certainly be learning more about. Sim has a practice called One Elephant in Oakville, Ontario. It's all-encompassing and holistic therapy as well, and employs mostly women, which is really interesting to hear. So pretty great. So Sim, right over to you.
Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate that introduction. It's lovely. And hi, everyone. I am Sim, like the SIM card in your phone. I do get Sin, but I would prefer that one not be my name. So we'll go with Sim. So I will share my screen and do a little bit of an introduction to the first part of our speaker series. Alrighty. So you heard a little bit about me. This is my dog, Django. I also have a cat, but he didn't make the cut today. But Django and I are here. So I work as a psychotherapist at One Elephant, and we're a collaborative wellness clinic. So we are women-led and we provide a variety of supports. So I won't go into too much of my educational background, but as a person, I am also starting to kind of move my life in different directions. I'm a post-divorcee, and I am moving that sort of part of my life forward. And work has been a pretty grounding force for me. So I was going to be tasked with just talking really quickly about what healthy relationships are. A healthy relationship, we know in terms of what we see out there. So we have all of these examples coming at us all the time through social media, through news, through our friends and families and people that we might compare. We may also think to ourselves, oh gosh, I really want that type of life, or I really want that type of relationship. But a lot of the variety we have in our relationships is not only just family, friends, but it also is ourselves. And that's the one I find we discount the most. But it's also our relationship with what we see activity as, movement, or our relationship with food, substances, our relationship with social settings. And then in the outer circle, we also have relationships with our communities, with spirituality, with religion, with the world, which may include laws and policies and all of these other sort of factors. So when we think about what impacts us as a person, there's a lot, and there's a lot that asks for our attention and sometimes demands our attention. So when we are thinking about the bare minimum in a healthy relationship, we are looking at reciprocity and respect, but we're also looking at being able to set limits. We're looking at being reciprocal. We're looking at growth. Do we grow in our own relationship, but also with others? Is it supportive? Is there admiration for each other or for yourself? Is it balanced? And is there clear communication? So a lot of the times we enter into unhealthy relationships, not only with people, could be with substances as well, overworking, aiming to be perfect. These are all different types of relationships we may have with ourselves. So the goal is to really ask ourselves, where do I feel quite independent? What makes me independent? What choices make me independent? But when I enter into a relationship, what do I need from that relationship? What do I depend on that relationship for? And this can be intimate, this can also be work, or it could be family. And then there's also this level of mutual, where we need to have shared experiences. So we may have shared experiences with our partners, our family members. We may have shared experiences with our colleagues. We may do team building activities. But any healthy relationship requires us to be our own authentic self. But it also requires a level of support, which is that dependence factor from somebody else, and then having these shared experiences. So when we don't have these sort of nice little areas intact, we often enter into unhealthy relationships. Any of these would actually seriously undermine a relationship, whether it's ourselves or others. So power imbalance, lack of respect, minimizing the self is something that I see happen quite a bit. So it's my needs don't matter. I can get to my needs, or I'll do it when the kids are sleeping. I'll do it when I can finally have a little bit of peace. And so we generally minimize what we need and maximize what others need. And this is also an unhealthy relationship that we have with ourselves, is to minimize ourselves. Abuse of any kind, whether it's verbal, mental, emotional, all of that would be considered unhealthy. And then here's where I find sometimes we don't really think of it as being unhealthy, but being over involved or under involved. So being over involved in a relationship with maybe, let's say, a partner, or being under involved with your partner, being over involved with your kids, or being under involved with them, that would still create this imbalance in the relationship. And I see a lot, we use this term in therapy with a lot of parents when we call them helicopter parents or snowplow parents. And these are parents who like to get ahead of their kids and move out the obstacles so that they're set up for success, but they also then don't end up learning to fail. So when we feel like we have to protect others, that also comes in to this relationship that we have with ourselves, the expectations of what it means to be a good parent. But all of that can sometimes start to tornado within us. It's really hard sometimes to stop and then ask ourselves if there is this stress overload happening. So we probably can look and think back into our relationships and say, yeah, I was probably in some unhealthy relationships. I definitely was. And a lot of it was for these reasons. And sometimes we know we need to do something different. We need to get out, we need to leave, we need to let go, but we don't. And we have a block to that. And the thing is, having knowledge, learning something doesn't actually mean that we end up doing better. So that transfer of knowledge is, we all know waking up at a certain time is probably better for us than snoozing, but we end up doing things that don't actually work out for us. There's no perfect relationship out there, but there is a relationship that we forget, and that is our own person. So when we don't have a strong relationship with ourselves, we generally don't know that next step. How am I supposed to set that boundary? Where am I supposed to set a limit with somebody? These feelings all start to complicate us, and we don't move. We kind of stand still. And so for me, when I was getting married, there were some serious concerns. There were some issues that I knew I probably should do certain things, like maybe leave or go to counseling earlier on, but I didn't do any of that. And it was because I really thought, oh, yeah, I'm a therapist. I can figure this out. Like, who's better to deal with this than me? And it was really difficult because the thing I really needed to do was to end that relationship at that point. But it can be really hard. And it's hard because there's short-term rewards, there's short-term things that keep us going, that complicate our choices. In order for us to really learn to then have those healthy relationships, we have to start with the self, and we have to start with self-preservation. So self-care often gets put to the table, right? We've all done it. We're all like, I should go to the gym today, but I'm really tired and I have all these things I have to do. Self-care is something that we minimize and maximize for others, helping others and taking care of others. We do very well. But for ourselves, we seem to have difficulty doing self-care. In my practice, I like to use the word self-preservation, because when I say to somebody, well, how are you going to preserve yourself? Which means, how do you keep going? How do you have energy? And how do you be the best version of yourself? Not the perfect, because that doesn't exist, but the best version of yourself. How do you take care of yourself? So when you have to preserve yourself, there's a couple of things we need to do. Now, Kim and Kelly will be talking about some of these areas and their strategies. I'm really going to be focusing on setting boundaries and figuring out how we move forward. Okay, so this is just a quick slide that talks about values. So when we have a block, it's often because we have differences in our values. We have shared values, that mutual part of the circle that I showed you before. These are things that we share with somebody. So loyalty, trust, respect. These are shared values, and we hold on to those. A lot of times we don't know what our values are. And so when we don't know what we stand for, we actually end up falling for many things. We also have competing values. So some of you may have felt like this, where you want to be a supportive partner or a supportive parent, but you also want to be a very successful entrepreneur. And so now there are two values that you have in conflict sometimes, because coming home and checking emails means taking time away from your partner or taking time away from your children. But because you also really want to be a successful entrepreneur, those two values are now causing some conflict in our life and in the relationships we have. When we want to be present for our children, but we also need to work harder. So these are conflicts that we're in. And sometimes it's really not easy to choose, but we end up having to choose. So I often recommend that you clearly write out what your values are for different parts of your life and keep these really visible so that you can see where you're disconnecting and then try to bring yourself back onto your path in terms of your values. So I see some of you have values of kindness, of generosity. So if you can't be kind or you're not kind to yourself, there's a disconnect. Sometimes we hold these values and we give them, right? So we're very kind to others. We're very generous to others. But are you kind to yourself? Are you generous to yourself? Do you respect yourself as much as you respect others? When I ask people to think about the things they love and write out 5 things, you can throw them in the chat and say, okay, these are the 5 things I absolutely love. I often find that people don't include themselves on that list. It's, I love my dog, I love my family, I love my kids, I love my work. We don't get on that list enough. And so we have to clarify those values of ourselves and of what it means to be in relationships with other people. So sometimes you will have to ask yourself, before we can set boundaries, sometimes you'll have to ask yourself if you are an oak or if you are a willow tree. So there's a story, and it's a fable, and it says in this field there are 2 trees. One is an oak tree and one is a willow tree. And the oak tree is quite strong. It looks up to the sky all the time. And the willow is a bit droopy. It's a little sadder. And so the willow looks at the oak and it always admires the oak. And it says, I wish I could be strong like that oak. I wish I could stand tall and, have my arms reach up versus reaching down all the time. A storm comes in. And after the storm is done, the willow looks at the oak and it sees that many of its branches have broken off. And the willow looks at itself and it says, well, I'm perfectly intact. How did that happen? And the oak replies is, where you can bend, I resist. And because you could bend, you can move with the storm. I couldn't move with the storm. I had to resist it. And that's why I broke. And so sometimes we do need to be an oak. We have to resist. If we're in an abusive situation, we can't just adapt to that. We have to resist it. But oftentimes we need to be willow trees, and that's flexibility and adapting to adversity through being flexible, setting limits and setting boundaries. So in some cases, you'll have to ask yourself, do I need to be an oak and set a complete deal breaker into play? Or do I need to be a willow and be flexible with sort of what needs to happen next. And can I set some boundaries and see how that works out for me? Because setting boundaries is really hard. It's really hard for us to say no. A client of mine once defined no as not obligated. And I absolutely really, really like that because we often feel very obligated. So it's hard to set limits. Some of you may have some ideas as to why that might be. Feel free to add that into the chat. Why might it be hard for you to say no? Oftentimes we know that we fear it because there's this active fear response within us from a brain's perspective, wanting to please. That fear response is people might judge me, people will criticize me if I don't say yes. We worry about the repercussions. We sometimes think it's easier to just say yes because saying no means we have to explain. Saying no means we have to add more of a dialogue where we might be depleted, and we can't do that. And so when we say no, we are actually worried about the impact that's going to have. And we also are not sure about our values. So we don't say no because we don't even know no is an option. We think we have to say yes. And sometimes we say this because we've created a rule. We say, oh, okay, for me to be a hard worker, I need to take on the tasks that are given to me, all of the tasks. And I don't really want to ask for help, and I don't have to delegate because I'm a hard worker and I just do what I'm supposed to do. Versus having a more flexible rule that says, I'm a hard worker, but that means I know my roles and responsibilities and I work within those. And so saying no is really important, but we often don't know that we need to do that. We also get a lot of reinforcement. So we are rewarded for saying yes. We're like, oh my God, you're so helpful. Oh, you're always there when I need you. Oh, you are the best. Like, thank you so much for helping me. You're always, always out there for us. When we get a lot of reinforcement for saying yes, we start to say no even less. Because no doesn't come with a lot of reinforcement. No comes with a lot of questioning. Why not? How come? And then we have to explain, and that becomes a little worrisome because we feel guilt and shame. And these are social constructs. So what I mean by that is we actually don't have an emotion within us that's guilt or shame. Society has told us that if you do these certain things, you should feel guilty. And if you don't parent this way, you should feel guilty. And if you don't work this way, you should feel guilty and shame. If you haven't reached a certain timeline in your life, you should feel guilty. But society creates those rules. And those rules are there because it's in some way a control. Different cultures have different reasons for guilt. So where I may feel guilty for making too much eye contact in Japan, I may not be feeling guilty for making eye contact here because it's expected. But it's a very much a social construct. But when we feel that guilt and shame, we have to expect that's going to happen when we say no, and then continue on anyways to do that. And that's the hardest thing, is once we've said no and then someone questions that, and then we don't know if we can continue. So when it's hard for you to decide, okay, I have these people in my life that I need to set boundaries with. There are people that I need to say no to. And sometimes it's really hard for me to do that. So let's figure out a way that's a bit easier. This is a bit simplistic. I learned this from a great psychologist named Tim Feeney. And he said that there are 3 problems. There's a me problem, which means I need to deal with this. There's a you problem, which means you need to go and deal with this. And there is a we problem. We need to figure out what we need to do and move this together. Sometimes we take on you problems when they aren't me problems. And that is where we really want to draw boundaries so that we can preserve the relationship with ourselves and also with others. Is if it's a we problem, we're going to have to get involved. But if it's a you problem, the kids can't find where the socks are. Well, you put them in they're in the drawer. You just put them in there, but they haven't looked. That's a kid's problem. That's a you problem. You need to go figure out where your socks are. I don't have kids, by the way, so that's why it's a little easier for me to say that. But we generally would say that sometimes we take on problems of our family members because we consider them a me problem. when they're actually not. So we really want to differentiate. Not everything is ours to solve. We can't do that. So let's set some boundaries then. One, how are we going to do this? When you set boundaries, that value is really important. So if you value kindness, sometimes you're setting boundaries because you are being kind to yourself, and it's not necessarily about the other person. If you are generous to others, when you set a boundary, you are now being generous to yourself. So one is just write out your value. Why is this important? And then actually role play this in a mirror, record it, script it so that you can understand how you want to communicate your boundary first. Then ask yourself, what words make me feel empowered that I can use? And you may see some of this in Kim and Kelly's presentations where they use a lot of the affirmations or I am. Those can make us feel quite empowered. Validating your truth. How can you validate that somebody might need something from you? That is true, they need help, but you are also validating your truth that you are not in a position to help. And that's really important. So we can have values, but if we only give them away and we never give them to ourselves, there's this huge disconnect. So we really need to validate that. And then offer clear solutions. I can't help you this weekend, but if you can wait for 2 weeks, I might be able to help you. And so you're offering a clear solution, but you're not minimizing yourself. And the hardest part of boundaries is enforcing them. Sometimes we can script them, we can role play through them, we know we're going to do it. And as soon as we have to do it, it becomes really hard. That enforcement is key to do. So we say start with small boundaries, start with set small limits that you feel are easier to enforce, and then build your way up to the harder ones. The next slide is just some examples that you could do or use in your assertive communication when setting boundaries. So we can't be passive, but we also don't want to be aggressive in our tone. But I might say, thank you for apologizing, but I don't feel that this relationship is okay for me or healthy for me. I might say, I value your opinion, but that option isn't for me. Or I'm open to compromises, but this is an area I can't do that. And so we are validating possibly what the other person needs from us, but we're also making sure that we don't minimize ourselves. And the last little section that I have is just about evaluating relationships. So when it comes to, okay, I've set some boundaries or I'm entering into a relationship with others or even yourself, we want to go through the flags. You may have heard this before, but the spin that I like to put on this is being really, really clear and specific about the behaviors you need to see, what's observable that you can see and say, yep, that is a behavior that is of respect. What is a behavior of actual kindness? And so we want to know what's going to let me proceed in a relationship. How do I go ahead? When do I need to slow down? When do I need to observe what's happening? And what are my deal breakers? What is telling me that I really have a no tolerance policy? And the deal breakers are things where those unhealthy pieces, so abuse, that would be a deal breaker. We're not waiting to kind of help move that out. It becomes problematic. So what behaviors do you need to see in others and in yourself to know which flag you're at, rather than just how you feel? So if somebody is maybe possibly dealing with grief and they're taking time away from my relationship, I might see that as a yellow flag in the sense where now our relationship is not a priority or whatever that might be. But it's yellow in the sense where I can process. So I can understand that they are going through something. I don't have to, it's not a deal breaker. I don't have to end anything, but I am just going to pay attention to when this person's stress goes up, what happens to our relationship. And same thing with us is when our stress levels go up, what happens to how we treat each other, ourselves. So checking in, really important. I like this diagram just because when you ask yourself if I'm between a 1 and 5, I can ask myself, how do I move forward? And if I'm between a 6 and a 10, okay, well, I'm doing pretty good. How do I stay doing pretty good? So honesty is key, having those check-ins. So because we minimize ourselves, those honest pieces are going to really help us move forward. have a bucket list of pre-planned self-care activities, just some things that you know are easy for you to do, 5 minutes, 10 minutes here and there, that really fill you back up. Protect your time and space. So I always protect the hour after work. I don't talk to anybody because I talk a lot for work. So when I come home, that hour is my quiet time, and it's my protected space. One of my favorite self-care evaluating relationships with yourself strategies is have a thinking spot. This controls where we worry, so we don't worry all over the house. So you can designate a comfy spot in your house, and you can say, okay, 20 minutes a day, I will go to this comfy spot and I will do the worrying, I will do the processing, I will be in my emotions, and I will think about it all. And then when I'm done in that 20 minutes, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go back to my life and try to be as present as I can. So giving yourself 20 minutes of pure validation is something we don't do. And we never really give ourselves that time because of minimizing ourselves. So I'm going to leave you with 3 C's, and these are the 3 C's of growth. So when you're growing your relationships, whether it's with others or yourself, and primarily when we are thinking about ourselves, I want you to consider the 3 C's of chaos, change, and closure. So many of you may have gone through chaotic times. This is adversity. These are unexpected events, transitions that you didn't know were coming. And this chaos has led to some changes that you've had to make. You've had to change your behaviors. You've had to change maybe where you live and who you live with. All of these changes are meaningful. And so we have to think about that meaning in terms of closing off the lessons in our life is, okay, I am now understanding why I've had to make these changes. And all of that actually ends up helping us grow, because we don't grow in something that's stagnant. We only grow when there is this sort of dynamic lifestyle that we're going through. So chaos, is, as hard as it can be, is so important to our growth. So spend a little bit of time tracking your own timeline. How have you moved through chaos? How have you made changes? And how are you now closing off those lessons to really grow that relationship with yourself? And that is it from me.
Can you, just while we're waiting for any questions to come up, give us some concrete examples of self-care? Because it's a term that's used quite often, but I think let's really break that down a little bit. And what does that mean? And I know it's going to mean something different for everybody, but give us some examples.
Of self-care. So when I often talk about self-care, it's often first with the self-narrative. How do you actually talk to yourself? And what do you say to yourself, and in what tone? A lot of the times we might say, okay, I'm going to go take a bath as self-care. And we go and take that bath. But we're in the bath and we're like, I have all these things I have to do. I'm wasting time. I really need to get the lunches made. I really need to send that email. So you're taking a break for yourself, but you're not actually taking a break. So we watch Netflix and we're actually on our phone the whole time. We're not taking in that actual movie that we're watching. So self-care is prioritizing that relationship with yourself in a very compassionate way, but being present with yourself in those activities. So if you are going to go if you are going to go for that bath, set up those candles, put on that music, really give back to yourself so that you're not distracted from the self-care. That's usually the biggest piece I find with self-care, is that we do the things, but we're not connected to the things.
That makes sense. Yes, because we talk about self-care, and like you said, you run up to have a bath and then you come out and that chaos is still there to take care of. So
Right.
how do you eliminate that and really focus on you? That's hard. That's hard in a busy world and the society that we've created today.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has said that their self-care is time in nature. That's their happy place.
Yes, that's a great one. I find I have plants everywhere in the house now, just because the impact on my mood when I'm just around them. So time in nature is a great self-care. It also helps you get rid of that chatter that's happening, or process the chatter that's happening.
Lots of comments still coming in.
Do you want me to take that last question?
Yeah, let's do that while we're waiting for everybody to regroup here.
Mm-hmm. So Gurpreet, you said that question is, how do you get out of the guilt you feel after saying no? That is such a good question. I often say you don't get out of the guilt, you sort of make room for understanding why it's there. of course you're going to feel guilty for saying no, because that's naturally what the brain is designed to do as well. It's going to feel bad. Nobody likes feeling guilty. But if you go back to what you're doing, like your value is, no, I'm doing the right thing. I can't say yes. I would love to help this person, but I can't. That guilt is still going to creep in. But the more you ground yourself back into your reasoning and the why you're important, not just why the other person is important, then that helps you make room for the guilt, but then it doesn't control you. It doesn't sort of dictate what you're going to say, because you're feeling guilt probably because you want to help or you want to do the thing, and then you feel like you're not meeting somebody's expectation. But it's okay to feel the guilt. It's okay to let yourself feel it. It generally just means that you're going against, or there's a disconnect in your values. So you want to be supportive, but you also want to be supportive to yourself.
About making you a priority.
Yes, you do matter. Yes.
You're worth it.
And I'll just add to that, like, Sam, I would love your opinion on this perspective, but like, guilt is just the most useless emotion that's out there, but yet we are all burdened with it. And if you focus on the controllables, so whatever it is you're feeling guilty about, if we try to break that down into an action, like, what would I do differently as a result of feeling this guilt? If the action that you think about is something that you wouldn't do, then shelf it, right? Like, you're thinking about it, you're trying to think, what can I do with it? And if you wouldn't change your behaviors because you're anchored in that value that is so much more important, throw it. Like, just do a physical throw of it, because once you've evaluated your options, don't waste your time on it anymore. I'm making that sound easy, and I know it's not, but scenario planning your guilt out, I think, helps you not feel guilty.
No, I agree. I think sometimes we have to just accept that we are going to feel uncomfortable emotions, but that we don't have to do anything with it, right? So you can still feel guilty and still say no. And that's okay to do, because it's that social construct and it's a part of society controlling us, right? You should do this and you should not do this. You matter, so you get to make your own decisions.
Yeah.
These questions and insights are really great. And saying no takes practice. It gets easier and it feels freeing. That's a really great comment too. So it sounds like somebody's on that journey to use the word no. Wonderful. Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate it.